Hi, I'm Claire and welcome to Hobby Starter. So what we're going to be looking at is wire work, and quite specifically wire work when you can use it to net cabochons. So if we have a little look at some of the materials and the tools that we're going to need. So we can see here, so we're going to work with two different sorts of wire. When I say two different sorts, so same copper core wire, but in different gauges. So wire comes in different gauges, lots and lots of different gauges, and they all have their purpose and use. So for this technique, which is going to be netting a cabochon, we're going to work with a structural wire. So we're going to, in this case, we're going to work with a 1 mil, but we could also work with a 0.8 gauge as well. So that's going to be our structural wire. And then we're also going to use a much finer wire, so you can see the difference here. And this is a 0.4 millimeter gauge wire. So you can see the difference there. So this is the finer, more malleable wire. So if I put the two together, you can see the difference there. So the thicker one is we're going to build the structure and the framework with. And this finer one, we're going to do a little bit of weaving, and we're going to also do netting as well, and we'll go through those techniques. So those are the wires we're going to be using today. So that's our materials. Tools wise, we're going to work with quite simple basic wire work tools. So we're going to work with our round nose pliers. So you can see here, if we have a look at the tips of them, they've got a rounded end. So those are what we're going to use if we wanted to make any loops, curves, something like that. So those are our round nose. And look very, very similar are our chain nose. So you can see they look very similar colour, but if we look at the tips and the ends, you can see you've got a rounded edge on the outside, but then on the inside you've got a nice flat surface area. And we're going to use those if we need to grip the wire or we need to pull it, something like that. So those are those. We're also going to work with some flush cutters. So you can see here, and they're going to give us a nice, sharp, precise cut. And always when you're looking with your flush cutters and wire work, what you want to be doing is making sure that you always use that shiny side. If you're cutting the wire with that shiny side, it's going to give you that straight edge, and we'll come back to that when we use them. So those are our flush cutters. The other pliers that I'm going to work with are the bail making pliers. So these are sort of maybe your next stage up from your basic wire work, and these are very, very useful, and you can see, so we've got different size mandrels here, and we'll use those when we create a bail for our pendant. So those are my bail making pliers. I'm also going to use, very, very useful, we're not going to be making any rings, but this ring mandrel is really, really useful for creating round shapes, and again, for just another mandrel to shape wire around. So we're going to use that as well. So those are mainly the tools that we're going to work with. We're also going to be using a mix of, so we're using our wire work in this project to hold and secure stones. So you can see there, so we've got a lovely labradorite faceted pendant. What we're going to use is we're going to use that netting technique with cabochons. So we've got some cabochons here, all different sizes, shapes and sizes. So the beauty of a cabochon is it's going to be, going to have that lovely dome across here, you can see, and then we've got a flat side to it. So that works really well with wire work because we can create a nice framework using our structural wire. So it's nice and strong. And then we can use our finer wire to net around it. So we're going to work with cabochons in this project. So I think pretty much that's all the tools and materials that you're going to need if you want to net a cabochon. So I'm going to move these out for a minute. Now, when I'm going to be making these, I'm going to do a couple of different ways to hopefully make the wire work technique clearer. So at some points in the demonstration, what I am going to do is I'm going to show you the different weaves and the different techniques using these brightly coloured wires. And these are just aluminium wires, which I wouldn't recommend for netting a cabochon because they're lovely and malleable, but they probably wouldn't hold it and they're going to be a little bit bulky. So I'm going to show you some of the techniques on these larger wires just so that hopefully you can see properly, and then we'll actually have a go with the actual wires themselves. So that's when I'll be using these. Okay. So if we have a think about where we're going to start with netting the cabochon. So netting is a technique, so it actually looks like, if we have a look at a piece here, what you want is you want a technique that is going to capture really, really securely that cabochon, but not overtake the beautiful stone that you're going to be working with and that you want to set. So it's an ideal way of setting that stone. And you can see you've got a nice open area at the back, that netting detail at the side, and then it just frames the cabochon beautifully. Okay, so if we look all the way around that piece, you can see, so we've got that framework of the structural wire. So we've said that we're going to work with maybe a 1mm gauge wire. You could also do this with a 0.8 or a heavier gauge if you wanted to. And then that netting is going to be with a 0.4. Okay. So our starting point needs to be, we want to think about our cabochon and how we create that framework that goes all the way around. So what's really important when we think about the framework that we want to make is that obviously we don't want that stone to fall out at the front, but we also don't want that stone to fall out at the back. So it needs to be secure all the way around and quite durable so that you can wear it as a pendant. So what we want to think about is if this is going to be if our cabochon is here, what we need to do is we need to make sure that our frame, our wire frame, sits in a couple of millimeters on the inside. So it sort of sits in like this. What we don't want is we don't want it to follow the line of our cabochon because then it will fall out at the back. So if we look at the piece that's done, you can see it's sort of sitting in a few millimeters from the edge, so we know it's not going to fall out. Okay, so we take our stone. I'm just going to move that out of the way. So you can see when I get the wire off the reel, what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to run that through, making sure I haven't got any sharp edges here. I'm just going to run it through my fingers, just like that, to get any kinks or bends out. It's a lot easier to do like this when you've got the weight of it on the reel. Okay. So you might be looking at the stone and thinking, okay, so it's not an enormous stone, so I'm going to just cut this amount of wire. But what we want to think about is we're going to make the entire piece ideally out of this one piece of structural wire. If you can make a piece out of one piece of structural wire, it just means you haven't got to keep adding in. So what we need to do is we need to take into account to go all the way around the cabochon and for our bail. So for a stone like this, which you can see, so it's probably maybe about just over an inch here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a good probably 30 centimeters or so of wire. So what we want to think about is how we work with the flush cutters. So if you have a look at them, we want to have a really, really nice, neat end on the wire. So if I cut this side, so you can see, so I'm cutting the piece of the wire that I want is this part in my hand. If I cut like that, I actually block off and I can't see the area that I'm cutting. I can see here on that shiny side, but I can't see in here. And what that's actually going to give me, that's going to give me the end that is not flush. So remember, this is the flush end. The bit that's on this side, which is the side that I'm going to be working with, is not going to be flush. So this is incorrect. So if we cut it like this, what we've done is we've given the nice flush end to the scrap bit that we don't want, and we've left that, you can see it there, we've left the end that's not flush. So if you have a look at at that piece there. You can see where we've got the pointed end. So now if we turn it round and we do it the right way, so we've got it that shiny flush side, we can see there. So if I cut there, we've got that lovely flush end. Okay. So what I'm going to do, again, let's get those kinks out of there. And I want to cut there about my 30 centimetres or so. Okay, so I'm going to start, and I want to work so that it's going to be fairly even. And everything I do, I'm going to keep it, try and keep it so it's quite symmetrical. So I'm going to just, as my starting point, I'm going to put those ends together here so that I know I'm working sort of like the centre of the wire work. Okay, and this would be, so we're now looking at the shape of the cabochon. And it'd be exactly the same if I just move this one in as well. You can see we're working, the framework is going to start and form the shape at this bottom point because I want my bail to be coming up here. So this is where your ring mandrel might come in handy because we can follow and use the shape of the ring mandrel, the nice curve, to mimic this curve here. So let me move this one out of the way. Okay, so we're going to mimic that curve there. So I'm going to hold the two pieces, the two ends together, so I know roughly in the middle. I'm just going to hold here and push against the side. So I'm just squeezing there all the way around. So what that's given me, if we take that out now, you can see I've got a lovely curve. I haven't had to do it free form. It's followed the shape of that mandrel. And I can adjust it. It's not set in stone. I can now pop that on the back of the cabochon. I'm just going to hold here and I'm going to squeeze that in. So I'm just pushing this together and you can see it's reducing. By pushing in here, it's reducing the shape on the inside. So this is the framework that we're going to make for our netting to go on. So I'm going to hold here, I'm just reducing this in and it's going to sit something like that. So I'm going to look at it from all angles. So this is the point where we want to really make sure that this framework sits on the back and that we're not following the shape of the stone. So if we were following the shape of the stone, it'd be something like that, which obviously it looks lovely and neat, but it's not going to be practical because when we turn it over, if it just follows the shape of the stone is going to fall out. So it's really important when you're making your framework that it sits in those few millimetres from the end. So I'm just going to reduce that down. So if you wanted to, you could hammer this if you, maybe if you're working with a 0.8 and it wasn't as thick as this 1mm, you could always give that a little hammer as well. So I'm just going to bring that in. So now what we want to think about is we want to lock this into place. So to do that, so I'm just going to pop that in. I'm happy that that's sitting nicely there. So I'm going to take my round nose pliers again and I'm going to work quite close up to that at that point there. You can see where my bail is going to go and I just want to have a very, very small loop now, and that loop is going to allow me to lock this framework in place. So I'm going to hold it in. I'm going to bring this wire all the way around so it's now going around and forming the shape at the top of my pliers. So I've now made a little loop there. If I need to make it smaller, I'm going to swap my pliers over and just bring that in a little bit. So now anything that we do, we change the shape ever so slightly, but because we've got two components here, we've got our wirework component and we've got the stone. It's pointless when you're making something if you need to have that, if you've got really, really super neat wirework, but it doesn't actually, the stone doesn't fit in it anymore. So every time you slightly alter the shape, always go back and just check that it still works well with the stone that you want to set. So I'm still happy with that. It's sitting in, it's not going to fall out at the back. I also know I've got that little loop there and that's sitting quite nicely. I also know that if I turn it over and we look at from the top, you can see I'm not going to see that loop there. We want all of that hidden behind the stone. Okay. So what we can do now is we can start and move on to the netting. So we've got our framework there. So if we pop that down, we know that sits in and we know that that fits well with the stone that we've got. So what we want to have a look at is I'm now going to take some of the different wire. This is going to be this is the 0.4. So I'm going to use the same colour here. You could use contrasting colours, but this is a much finer gauge. This is a 0.4, and you can see the difference here. So with the framework, we wanted a heavy structural wire because we wanted it to hold its shape. The point with this one is we want it to be as lovely and malleable as possible so that we can really get a neat effect and a neat look with that netting technique, because it looks like, it's called netting because you're netting it in. It looks like nets going around the shape of the stone. So to get the neatest effect with that, we want to work with a much lower gauge. So if you think about the difference of the gauges, we're working with a 1 mil here, so that's a 1 millimeter gauge wire. The one down from that would be a 0.8 millimeter. Then next to that usually will be a 0.6 millimeter. So we're jumping down several gauges down. We're going to go with a 0.4 millimeter. So you can see, so when I pull on this, the finer gauge, this structure will hopefully not come out of shape. Okay, so to prep this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and cut off. I'm going to go with at least a full meter or an arm's length of that 0.4, because it's always easier to cut off the excess than it is to add in. So I'm going to cut that off and we'll pop that there. And what's usually good practice is what will happen when you've got a long length of wire like this, usually it will pull in and gather any tools or any other materials that you've got. So just sort of like push them out of the way, because chances are this will find it and it will catch on it. So what we need to think about with this, with the 0.4, is what we don't want to do is we don't want to get kinks in this. So it's really important to think about the direction of how we're using it. So what we don't want to do is, if we have a look at the 0.4, we don't want it to loop in and go back like that, because then if we pull on that, that's going to get a real kink in that wire and we're going to get a weakness in it. So let's cut that off. It's just really important, maybe if you're new to wire work and what you're thinking about is that you usually worked with maybe beading threads or cords, you have got a bit of flexibility and leeway, and you've still got flexibility with wire, but what you can't do is if you can't go back and forth with it, because what that will do is that will make it brittle and it could snap. So what we want to think about now is we're going to do the netting. So at the moment, we don't need the stone. We're going to do a last check that it's the right size before we bind this together. Yeah, I'm happy with that. So I'm going to pop that down now. So what I need to think about is I'm going to start off, and I have to have my netting wire so it's coming on the outside of my framework. So the area we want to look at is this one here, and I will show you on the larger wires, but you can see if this is the frame that is there, that wire is coming on the outside of it. So that's what you're aiming for. You want it so it's coming on the outside. You can see, so this is the frame, there's the outside. If it was coming on the inside, it would look something like that. So you can see the difference. That's on the inside, so you don't want it to be like that. It's really important so that when you start that netting, that it's on the outside there. So what I tend to do is I leave myself a small tail here. I position it so I know it's on the outside, and then I come back with this small tail and I'm going to go through that loop that we made. And all I know now is that the wire that I'm going to do my netting with, I know that is in the right position. Then I can just hold that there, and I can take the little tail that we've left, and I'm going to go in and out of the loops for a little while. And that, you might find it easier if you work with your chain nose pliers. And that all I'm doing is just taking that little tail of wire and binding a couple of times through that loop, and I will hold this up so that you can see it where that wire is going. You're just looking to get a couple of wraps and loops so that it binds it really well, so you can see there. So now we've gone through the loop and onto that that framework there, and we know that is more, it's solid now, and that's what we want. We also know that our netting wire is in the right position as well. So I'm just going to go in and snip those off, snip that little tail off, and we'll get that out of the way. And we know now that that is in the right position. Now you can see I've got a couple of kinks in there. What I don't want to do too much of is just pulling it like this. It's really tempting when you're working with wire, is to overwork it, for the same reason that if you go back and forth, is you're going to make it brittle. So just a couple of just little bits to get those kinks out, and we know we're ready for that. Okay, so I'm going to pop this down for a minute, and I'm going to talk about the netting technique that we're about to do. So we've built our framework, we've put on the finer netting wire that we're going to use, that 0.4. So now it's about the technique of how we get those lovely loops going around. So I'm going to pop this down and we'll talk about it. So I'm going to draw a couple of pictures and we'll look at the heavier gauge wire. I'll show you on the aluminium wire. So what you're looking for, let's move that out of the way. If we imagine that this is our framework, so we're looking at it from the side. So we've built our framework. This is our framework that our cabochon is going to sit on. So it's going to sit on there. What we're looking to do is we're going to do the netting. So we're going to create some loops that are sort of going to go round like this. And we're going to talk about those as if they're rows. So you can see how these loops are starting to form. So this wire here is the 1 mil, the structure and the framework. These smaller ones, these loops, we're going to be doing with the 0.4. So you're essentially building rows like this, and smaller loops go into larger loops. And we're going to build, and you can do as many of those rows for however deep your cabochon is. So if this is our cabochon and it sits like this, you're just going to build those rows until it secures that cabochon. So it's that looping action that we're going to be doing with the wire. So if we have a look at that, of how it corresponds in the larger wire. So if we imagine that this is going to be our framework. So this represents the framework for the cabochon. And hopefully with the contrasting wire, you'll be able to see the technique. So that was the larger version that we've just made. This bright blue is going to represent the 0.4. Just going to cut the length of that. So remember, if we think about it, what we wanted is the cabochon is going to sit on here. So we know that we need that on the outside. So if we see the reverse, so we've got the outside here. What we don't want it on the inside. That's incorrect if it's like that, correct if it's like that. So again, I'm just going to lock this into place. So we're going to go through here, and I'll wrap that one as well, so that that's now set up. So what we're looking at now is we want to get, so that like I did in the drawing, we're going to get those loops. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, so if we look at it like this, so it's going to be, here is our framework. Okay, we're looking at trying to create a loop. So if we have a look from above, we can see. So I'm going to create that loop. So I'm curving with my thumb and I make a loop that sits on the outside of the framework. Okay. So if we look all the way around, you can see. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the tail, so the end of it, of the piece of wire, and I'm going to go up through the frame. So I've gone all the way up here. So I'm coming up through the frame, but then I don't come out at the frame. I'm actually then going to go and come into that loop that I've just created. Okay, so I'm going to take the tail, go up through the framework, and then up through the loop that I've created. Okay, so now I'm going to start and pull this through. And when I get a little bit close, you can see I'm not pulling the wire like this, I'm just guiding it through. And what I'm actually doing is I'm tying a knot almost around that framework. So at this point now, I'm going to hold here and encourage that wire to go in that direction. And I've tied, so I've got a little loop going around that framework. And this wire is then back in the right position to do the next loop. So I curve round, and again, it's still on the outside of the framework. I'm going to find the end, and I come up through the framework, up through the loop, and pull through. And again, we want to try and get these loops if we can. When you've done a couple and you get the hang of the technique, then what you're looking to do is to try and get those loops to be the same size. So again, we'll go again. So we're forming that shape of the loop, staying on the outside of the framework. We take the end, up through the framework, up through the loop, and pull through. And tighten so that we get that small loop there. So you can see how these are starting to form. So again, we'll go once more. So we've gone round, outside of the framework, taking the end, up through the frame, into the loop, and pull through. So you can see, so if I show you all the way around the piece on the larger wire, and then we can have a look at what it looks like when we use it on our actual gauges. So remember, this is just the thicker aluminium, but you can see how this is starting to look now. And they're all sitting on the outside of the framework. And you will have some movement, so it sort of like can sit out like this, and it can move around like that. So that's the technique that we're looking for. We're to look to create those loops, and always remember on the outside of the frame. So that's with the bigger wire. So let's have a look now on the actual size wires. So remember, we're working with that 0.4. So it might be a little bit finer to see, but you'll get to see what it looks like in the actual wires that we're working with. And also I'm working with a much longer length of the wire, because remember, we took a full meter with this. Okay, so we've done our few wraps to secure the frame. Our wire is starting on the outside of the framework. So now we're going to make a little loop. So you can see it's much smaller than it is on the larger wires. I'm going to find the end, which is quite a way away, because we're working with this long length. Okay, taking the end, I'm going up through the frame and up into that loop. So you can see, so just for ease, what I've done is I've just given it a slight bend on there. So when I go in, I can go up, and I've angled that wire so it would just go through. There we go. So again, so I'm going to pull through, and you can see I'm guiding it through. I'm not pulling really firmly against on that 0.4. I'm just guiding it through at the moment. Now when it gets to this point, it doesn't matter if that little loop goes a little bit astray, we can just pull it in. So I'm pulling up, and then I'm bringing it down, so really reducing that loop. So that loop here for a cabochon, so if we had to look at compared to the cabochon, that loop is maybe a couple of, maybe 3 millimeters high, something like that, coming up here. It's quite small. You don't want it too tiny, but you can play around with the size of those and you'll get a different look. But you can see how that's going to sort of sit and scale wise compared to the stone that you've got there. Okay, so I'm going to then do another one. So I've got that curve, remember? Now what you're looking to do when you've got the technique of the netting, what you're trying to do is trying to get those loops so that they're a similar size, which means that they're a similar height. So let's do a couple that are the same sort of size, and then we'll do some deliberate ones that are slightly off. So with this one, I'm trying to get it the same size as the one before. So really I'm coming in and I'm just reducing it down. So I'm holding firmly my finger and thumb on the framework and I'm bringing that down there. And I'm also trying to keep the wire so that it's going in the direction that I then want my next loop to be in. I'm not working all the way over here. I'm working and trying to keep that wire in the direction that I want it to flow in. I'm going around this way, I'm going clockwise, so I'm trying to keep that wire going in the same direction. So again, so I'm going to come to the next one and we'll try and get this one so it's the same sort of size. So again, I'm going to find the end. That little kink is still in there, so that makes it easier to feed through. Bring this in. Now when it gets a lot closer, coming right into the area that I'm working, and I'm pushing down with this finger to get it so that it sits and it's the same size. And you can see hopefully they're starting to look nice and even. So if we want to do one now that we want to avoid, so if we come around, we haven't really formed our loop, and we're just going to bring it up, bring this through, and we're going to leave it like that. So you can see that's going to stand out as being very different to the three neat ones that we've done. We can rescue it because we can just sort of pull it back ever so slightly and just tighten it up, and then we can turn the wire. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep doing that technique all the way around. So you can see, so I'll do one more and then we'll swap over to the next stage. So you can see, so I'm going to hold it here. You can also, whichever feels comfortable for you, so I was holding here. I know that I'm happy with all of that, so I'm going to hold that there. So I've almost pretty much formed the height of the loop that I want anyway. I'm going to hold it, take the end, come up through, and I feed this through now. And then release. So it's whatever really feels comfortable for you. Ways that you can keep it so it's nice and neat. You can start to count the loops that you're making and try and get those so it's nice and even all the way around. So if you'd be looking at the shape as a whole, what we'd be thinking is, if we think about it as a clock, we started at 12, our halfway point is going to be 6, so however many loops we have on this side, we could then try and get the same on the other side. So you can start to see how this is forming, and you've still got lots of movement in there. So I'm going to do a couple more and then we can swap over to the one I've done here. So you can see how this is going. And you can really start to speed up. So I would say have a practice with the netting technique, and then really get in and then try and get it so it's nice and even and neat, so we can see how this is starting to form. So what we want to think of with this is we're working, if we think back to the very beginning, what we're looking at are thinking about it in rows. So when we did the drawing, if we look at how this corresponds now. So if we look at how this works, so we've got our structural wire, which is here. So our structural wire would be going here. And what we've just been doing here is this first row. So if we look at that, so it's that first row of loops here. So if you think about it and you think about it in terms of rows, you're going to do as many rows as you need for the depth of your cabochon. So if you look at different cabochons, if we look at some of them will be really, really shallow, and some of them will be flat. So you can see how they work there. So it will be completely dependent on the size, the shape, the depth of the cabochon that you're working with. That will determine how many rows that you're going to have. Okay, but for that first row, if I pop those down there, that first row, you can do all of that netting without the cabochon in there. So if I swap now to this one, we can see I've done all of that. So I've got to this point here. So let me just get these straight out of the way. So we've gone all the way around. So I've gone past that 6 o'clock point, and I'd carried on round. And we can see the netting there, and that's the first row. So now what we want to think about is, we've still got a little bit of movement. We're coming to this point here. Now it gets a little bit, the stone is going to get smaller. We're going into the point, the tip of the pear shape. So all I've done, it was like this, and I've just maneuvered it so it's sitting out now. And that's going to give me an idea of how many more loops I need. So if we looked at it, when it was up like that, it was actually quite close to the point there. When we open it out, you can see it's going to retract ever so slightly from here. So what I want to think is, have we got enough loops? So I'm going to pop the stone in place, and I could probably do with one more on there, 1 or 2 going around. So I'm going to do it in exactly the same way. Let's get any of the kinks that are out. That's it. So I'm going to take the end. And what I'm looking for is, I want to make sure that I don't really want to go through that loop, because that's going to lock it in place. So I'm going to just bring that there. And I'm going to do one more here. Now we've got wire work that we're going to need for the bail. So I want to make sure that it doesn't get trapped underneath here. So I'm just going to take, so if I start to tighten this a bit, tighten that loop, I'm going to lift that over the bail there, so it doesn't get, that loop doesn't get caught and trapped underneath the bail wires. And let's bring this down. So it can get a little bit fiddlier at the top, just because you're having to navigate around those bail wires. So if I move them out of the way there. Okay, and I'm going to do one more going across here. So I'm going to take the end. Remember, we're going to come moving those bail wires, keeping them out of the way, up through the framework. That's where my loop is going to be. Up here. And again, making sure that they're not trapped into the bail wires. And just push that down. And I think that's made those nice and secure now. So let's have a look. And if I put that over, yeah, I've got enough loops on that first row now. It's gone all the way around. So it's really important when you finish off that first row, that you sort of allow it to retract a little bit, so that you know that you've got enough, so that they're not pulled too tightly. Okay, so what we can do now as well, we can also go in and neaten these up if we wanted to. So I can just go in my, again, round nose pliers, so you're using that mandrel. I'm just bringing it in and just lifting up so it takes on the form ever so slightly of those pliers, which is going to give me a neater loop. Just working my way all the way around. And you could do that with your round nose pliers. You can also do it with, if you've got your step bail makers, anything that's going to give it that nice rounded edge. Okay, so what we've done now is we've completed that first row. So we've been able to do that with no cabochon in place and just thinking about the wire. But now what we want to do, we need to do a second row. And now we need to introduce our cabochon to our wire work. So I'm going to pop the cabochon on. I want to, so it sits something like that. So you can see all that netting was sitting up like that. It's now sitting flat. So we're going to pop that on. Now it's a little bit fiddly at the moment because we've got nothing apart from a couple of loops at first that are holding it all together. Once you get past that 6 o'clock point, that's sort of that halfway, it's going to be a lot easier because you're going to start to pull the cabochon in. So at first it is a little bit fiddly, there's no getting away from it, but you can just hold it and support it with your thumb and your finger. So now what we need to think about is your second row of netting is exactly the same technique, but what we've done by putting the cabochon into the framework, we've blocked off. If I just take, so I'm going to just cut a little bit of this wire off so that we've got it's a little bit easier. So what we were doing with our netting wire is we were taking this with the loop and we were coming up through the framework. But what we've done now is, once that cabochon is in there, we've blocked that off. Okay, we can't get through there. Okay, that cabochon is stopping that. So rather than going up through the framework, what we're going to do is we're going to create a loop and we're going to go up through the first row that we've made. So we're going to sit this down onto the setting and we're going to start, and so while I can still access it, I'm just going to lift this last one just up a little bit. Okay, so my first loop on my first row is this one here. Okay, so you can see there, and that's the one we're going to aim for. So I'm going to form my loop in the same way that I did for the first row. I'm going to take the end, but like I say, I've blocked off so I can't go up through the framework, so I'm going to go through and into that first loop. So I've gone into it and then I come back out into the loop that I've just made on that second row and pull through, making sure I'm not twisting the wire, just taking my time with it. So that cabochon at the moment wants to move all over the place. I'm just supporting it, thumb, finger, my fingers at the top, and I'm going to push forward and bring round. So you can see there that that first little loop that I've done has gone into the loop on the first row rather than the framework, but it's still the same technique of creating that little loop, that net to catch it. So if we do the next one, so I'm going to go through this one here, so that's the second one, and bring through and pull forward. Okay, and again, so we're going to form that curve, bring it through, feed it through until we get quite close and then curve, and we can start to see that it's actually catching already on the curve of the cabochon, that smooth dome. So I'm going to start and bring this through. So again, going through the loop in the first row, bringing it round and curving it. So the beauty of working with wire rather than your beading thread with, like, you know, in a technique like this, is it's really going to hold its shape. And although you've got that very, very delicate look, it's actually quite firm and secure. So you've got that lovely, almost like a filigree or crochet look. It's actually with a very, very fine metal, so it's going to hold its shape. So you can see I'm starting to work my way around, making sure that framework hasn't slipped. I'm actually getting very, very close now to that 6 o'clock point. So what I do need to do is I just need to make sure that I don't pull it over. I keep that quite central there. So if we have a look where this is going, so now this next one I'm going to go in and tie tighten this round. And I can already start to see, although it's pulling and grabbing onto the cabochon now at this 6 o'clock point, I can already tell that I'm going to need to do, I would say, so this is, remember, this is my second row, and although it's starting to pull over the side, we're going to need a third row because yes, it's starting to secure it, but we can see it's not covering yet. It's not going over that curve of the stone. So again, just making sure, and it's really important once you go past that halfway, that we don't pull it too tightly. Okay, so I'm going to just keep working my way around. And really now it is starting, we're starting to get a nice tension. It's pulling that stone and securing it into the netting. You can see I'm still, although I'm speeding up, same technique, and I'm actually keeping that wire in the direction that I'm going to do the next loop in. So it's always coming back round in that direction. So what's becoming very, very obvious is that little kink that I put in the wire is very useful. So you can see there, it's allowing me to sort of almost like hook in and bring round. And again, hook into there and tie that knot. So we're actually, if I just move those out of the way, we've only got a few more left of this second row. So what we need to think about is we know that we need to do a third row with this because it's not coming high enough. But this is going to give us the option, which is a really nice variation on this, is you might think, I definitely need a little bit more wire work over the top, but I don't know if I want to do a full third row. So if we look at the options that we've got, so I'm just going to go here, and while I can access it, I am going to go in. If we have a look at the top, I'm just going to neaten those up a little bit. So if we bring that round. Okay, so I'm now going to go into the next one here. Okay, so we've finished now that second row. So if we have a look at it, we can go in, trying not to scratch the cabochon, but we can go in and neaten those loops. So what we can do at this point is, rather than going in through every loop that we've done, which is how we've done the first and the second rows, what we could do is, so I'm going to start it with the first loop. So a nice variation with this would be, we can look at the shape of the stone and we could miss a few out. So what I'm going to try and do is angle it so that I have one piece of wire going through, so it's coming across here. And then I could do another couple like that. So I'm going to take this, so I'm actually going to miss out a couple. I'm going to take that wire so it's sitting over the top, and I'm going to miss out a few, and we're going to go through this loop now. So we've got wire that's holding it in. But we haven't gone all the way through, but it's sort of sitting as it's going across the front of the piece. I'm going to do one. So this time I'll just miss out one. So I'm going to miss out that one, and I come through here. And we'll bring that round. Again, I'm going to miss out one, and that takes me to about that 6 o'clock point, so that's going to look quite nice and even. And bring that round. Position that there. So again, I'm going to miss one out. I might actually miss two out there because I think it just sits a little bit more neatly, got a bit more symmetry there. And I'm going to come round. So this time I'm missing one out. Bring it through. So you can see it's same technique, you're just doing a larger loop. and then we can come in here. And I'm actually going to take that into that one there. So what we've done is we've done a variation there. So we've done our third row, but what we've done is so if we have a look at all the way around, you can see, and if I hold it up as well. So we've done our third row, but we've done that variation where we've missed some of the loops out, but we're still securing and we're adding detail on the front, but it's not obscuring the cabochon at all. So the other thing that you could do as a variation as well with this technique, if you wanted to, and you can do this in every single loop, or you could do it just at the top like I'm going to now, is you can add in accent gemstones or spacer beads. So if you wanted to do that, so if we have a look here, what we could do is we're going to form our loop in the same way. So I'm going to take some spacers. I'm going to bring that round. So I've just fed that through there, and then I carry on as normal and I bring that loop there. So a little bit tighter now because it's really coming in contact with the cabochon. So just make sure that I get rid of any of those kinks and bring that round and tighten that up. And you can see, and then you then go, and that gives you the detail with the beads if you wanted to. So that is how you net your cabochon. Now what you've got there, we've secured the stone, and a good test is to see whether, give it a shake and see if it doesn't fall out at the back, it doesn't fall out at the front. So we know that we've got that. But what we've got now is we've got a secure stone. And if I show you this one, the difference there. So with this one, I'd actually got my full 3. You can see I've got 3 rows there. So we've got the first one, we've got the one on the side, and then we've got a full third one there. And you can see how that sits. So same techniques, but different looks. But what we've got now is we've got 2 wires that are sticking up here. So we've got the stone all secure. So what we want to do now is we want to create the bail. And that we're going to use these wires for that. So if I pop that down, keep that out of the way. So to create the bail, we're going to use same sort of wires. We've got our structural wire here, which is already integral. It's part of it. That's what we've used for the framework for the cabochon. And we're also going to use our 0.4 to do some weaving on that bail. So if I just have a look here, what we're going to do is we're going to do something called a figure of 8 weave. So again, if I show you on the larger wires, I'm going to take, so this wire again is going to be my structural wire. So let's pretend that this is our large bail. So we know it's shaped something like that. And again, my blue wire represents my 0.4. Now a figure of 8 weave is a really good weave to fill large areas, flat areas. So what we want it to look like is going to look something like this. So you can see I've almost got like this diamond shape here, and it's filled with a weave. So we want a weave that is going to, it's not really appropriate to net into this. We could do, but it's quite fiddly and it's going to get very, very, very tight and quite congested in the middle there. So we want more of a weave that's going to go, is straighter and is going to go from one side to the other. So that's where a figure of 8 weave works very, very well. So I'm going to take this piece of wire, and in the same way with my netting, I'm going to anchor on. So I've got 1, 2, and that wire is coming out from underneath. So remember, this represents this piece here. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to come wrap over, and then come underneath this side. Okay, so I've come underneath, and then I'm going to wrap once and twice around that side, and so I'm coming over the top, and then I come in and around and back underneath this other side, and that's where that figure of 8 comes in. You can see it here on that blue wire. So if we think we're going once around, back up to the top and around and around like that. So you can see we're going to go all the way around. And what you can do is, if you want it so that that weave is a little bit more open, we can hold here and I can go once, twice, 3 times, and then come across. And you can see that makes it more of an open weave. And if I add more coils and wraps, it's going to be even more open because it gives you bigger distance between the wraps, the lines of wire that come across. So to do your bail, if we take some of our actual wire, and you don't have to cut it off now because we've got a nice open end. I'm just going to do it first so it's a little bit easier to work with. So what I'm going to create is almost like a diamond shape or part of a bow tie. So I'm going to come up here. We're thinking about how does the balance of the bail work with the piece. You don't really want to have a huge bail like this of really opening it out and have it oversized. It's going to really shadow and overtake that cabochon. So I'm going to come up here. I'm probably going to come about maybe half the way across. So I'm going to get my chain nose pliers. I'm going to bend in. Then I'm going to do the same on this side. So you can measure as well if you wanted to, or you can do it by eye, and I bend in that way. So I've started to create that diamond shape. But what I've done by doing that is I've closed the end off there. So I'm just going to go in about the same. I'm going to bring that out, do the same on the other side and bring that out. I've now got a nice open end that I can then get my wire work in. So I've got my 0.4. Take a little tail and I'm going to anchor on in the same way I did with the blue wires. So I'm going to wrap once, twice, let's anchor that on really, really securely. So I'm ready to go now. It's coming out from underneath the wire on this side. So I'm coming around and I'm going to go around there and a couple of wraps on this side. And remember, it's that cross section that gives us that figure of 8. So I'm going to come round. It's quite a small area, that bit, so I'm just going to do a couple of wraps on each side and bring that round. So again, remember that cross section. So I come up and over, 1, 2, underneath and over the other side, 1, 2, bring it down in the middle. And you can start to see how that is now starting to fill that area. Now as it widens out, that's where we can go in and we can start to do more coils. So I've done 1, 2, so I'm going to wrap 3 times there and then come across. So I'll go down in between, underneath on this side of wire, and I'm going to go 1, 2, 3 on this side, back through the middle, and now I'm going to do 4. So I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, and then that cross section, and I come over to the other side and do 4 wraps there. And you can already start to see how that weave is opening out as it follows the shape of the structural wire work as well. So you can see how that is starting to form there. So you're going to do all of your weaving so that you go all the way up. Now what's going to happen is when you get to this point here, it's going to start to want to sort of slip back down towards that narrow point. So every time you do a coil here, you're going to push it down so it's nice and compressed. And you're just going to keep going and pushing that up until you've got that diamond shape. So it looks something like, so if we have a look at this one here, you can see there how we've got that bail. So if we sort of go back a step we'd done all our netting. If we look at the one we'd done, and we'd added beads on, and we'd still got this tail here. So it's what we do with this tail. So you can see on this point, I'd done all my netting, and I'd actually still got quite a long length. If we have a look how much I've got left there, I've actually probably got about 1/2 metre. So I could use that to do the weaving of my bail. If I wanted to do that, what I'd be looking at is, that's my last loop, we can see here. So I just feed it very carefully back down here so it sort of gets lost, and then I can start wrapping and using that wire for my bail. If you feel like you haven't got enough wire, maybe you just have I don't know, a couple of centimetres, what you'll want to do, so if we move this out of the way, this is my last loop on my netting. So I'm now going to come down. So I've created one more. I might just pop in one more just to tie that in. So we've got our last loop here, and bring that in. So I've got one loop there. So I'm going to make sure that's a really nice, neat, tidy loop in. So the area that we want to look at is just in there. You can see tiny little, almost like 2 wraps around that last. And this is where our flush cutters come in. And remember, you want to go nice and neat so that you don't have any sharp edges on here. So I'm going to go in very carefully and making sure I don't cut any of the loops, just get rid of that tail of wire, chain nose pliers. I'm just going to go in and knit that in so that end is tucked neatly away. And so we've got rid of that wire. This wire here was the starting for my bail weaving, so I can get rid of that as well, tuck that in. So that now leaves me with, I've got my netted cabochon, I've got the woven bail, and I'm going to leave this tail on for the moment. So we've got our diamond shape. So what we can do now is we can look at, I can use my bail pliers, so I'm going to just grip across here. I'm going to start, so I'm going to bring it forward and start to curve round. So I've got on the largest at the moment. I'm going to swap round now, slightly smaller. So I want to have a nicer, we're thinking about this sitting, we've brought it forward, nice curve, and now I'm going to join those together. So if we look at it from all angles, you can see that's where our chain or our cord is going to go round. I'm going to shape it from the front to make sure it looks nice and neat. We can take this wire now and we can do a couple of wraps around just to secure that. So I'm going to take that. Basically, you're just looking through. You've got a good matrix of wires there. So you're going to feed that through. So that then, those back bail wires then become locked into at the front. And we can do a couple of those. And you can see you're just going to feed that wherever you can back through so that it secures it there. So your choice now is, what you can do is you can either leave that as a plain bail and you could snip those off, or you can come in, if you want to snip them off, maybe just snip them off and do like a little loop at the back like we did at the very beginning, just small loop, tuck them in and they're out of the way. Or if you feel like when you're looking at it, you want to add more detail. So you can see on the one that I've done with the labradorite, we've got that plain look, so we've just got a spiral at the front. If you feel like you're looking at it and you think that the balance of the cabochon to the bail, like I would look at this and I think I could probably have done with a slightly wider bail. So what we can do, we've got enough structural wire here, so we can add another layer to that bail just to make it a little bit wider. So I'm going to take the wire and I'm just going to start and shape it. So I'm coming from the back and I follow the shape of the bail so that I end up at the front. And that gives me a nice contrast. You can see from the woven section here and the plain here. And again, I'm going to do the same on the other side. So I'm going to come up, follow the shape of the original bail. Bring it in, and this is quite, once you're starting to form this wire, remember it's quite a structural, nice structural wire, and we can put a couple of wraps in to secure it if we need to. Just move that tail out of the way. It's always best if you can leave tails on like this, because they are really useful. If you decide that you might want to add spacer beads, things like that, that's going to work really well. So I'm going to come in. I could also, if I wanted to, add in a little bit of detail there. So I think to balance it out, I'm just going to bring that over. So I've almost got like a crisscross coming at the front. I'm going to bring that down again, because I've got lots of wire to play with there. So that's working really well. And I'm going to come back to the front again. So if we follow that round, you can see all the way around. And we've now got a nice, I think that's sitting, and it's a lot more even. It's a lot more balanced out as well with that cabochon. So I'm going to take this, and I think we'll finish that there. So I'm going to snip off here. I'm going to snip off here. So I could have done a spiral there if I wanted to, but what I might just do is I'm just going to nip that in there. So I'm just looking at areas to tuck in that wire work. So again, so I'm bringing it in, and just you want to get it so it's looking nice and even. So that's going to tuck into that weave. And that's gone in there. So when you're happy with the balance of all our structural wire, remember we've still got this lovely long piece of weaving wire. We can just go in, you're just basically almost like a needle and thread, you're just going to add in some very discreet stitching to those structural wires to get them so that they're all secured to each other. So I'm going to put a couple in here. I can go back through to the front. So I'm just going to get rid of that kink there, it's making it a little bit difficult. I come out here and just will secure this side as well. Now when you're looking at it, if you remember, I've got two pieces at the front, because that's where I thought it looked best, of structural wire. If you feel like you haven't done a particularly neat job there, your option is, because again we've got all this weaving wire here, we can go in, so I'm just going to go in at the back there, somewhere around here, bring it out at the front. Now it's going to look, it's a different colour, but you can get the idea of how a nice spacer bead can then just give you that finishing touch, and then will then just cover up if you're not too sure. So I like those ends there, but I'm just going to bring this in, and I'm going to bring that round so that I'm just coming up in between, and I'm going to add in a spacer bead. So we're just looking, it's a little bit fiddlier now because we've got lots of wire work there. So again, we're looking to get that little angle, that little hook, so that it comes out of that matrix of wire. There it is. Let's bring this round. So bring that there. So now it's going to stand out because it's silver, but if it was a lovely copper one, and we could just bring that in there. So again, so I'm going to come around this side, get that little angle in, and secure that. And bring that there. So now I think pretty much we don't want to add any more detail on that. So we've done our netting of the cabochon. We've created our own quite decorative bail. So we'll have a last look at it. I don't think we want to do much more to that, so I can get rid of this final wire. Ideally, if you can get that wire so it's just going, wrapping a couple of times around a single wire, and then you can cut it off somewhere discreetly, that's great. Make sure it's that flush end and you've tucked it in. We can just shape that so you're looking at the balance. give that a shape so you can start to see now how that is working. So if we look all the way around the piece, we can see we've done the netting. You can see there, so that netting is going all the way around. We know we've got that nice framework, so it's not going to come out at the back. We've created a nice, fancy, quite ornate bail where we can pop our chain or cord, kumihimo, anything like that through. But that is a really, really secure way of setting your stone. So wirework is a great medium to work with, just as wirework on its own. You can see that how lovely that figure of 8 weave was. You could just do complete pieces of jewellery in that figure of 8 weave. Or it works brilliantly if you want to bring together stones and wirework, and that's where that netting technique really, really comes into its own. So I hope that's been useful, so you can see how to work with your wire and your stones together. Thanks very much.